This lecture will provide a foundational understanding of cryptography, a short overview on its use in history, how some of the more basic cryptographic ciphers were used, and the current status of the technology as it stands today. Cryptography is a method of storing and transmitting data in such a form that enables only the recipients to read and process that data. It effectively scrambles the content so that anyone else who looks at it will not understand what the unencrypted form of the data looks like. Cryptography has included many different techniques over the years, such as microdots or blending text with images, but in today's environment it is most often associated with scrambling plain text into ciphertext to encrypt data, and then reversing this process to decrypt the data. Plain text is also sometimes referred to as clear text within the community of cryptographers. Now, the primary focus of cryptography in use today is on ensuring several elements of security. Now, these are terms you've probably heard in other courses. First is confidentiality, which keeps information private so that unintended audiences don't have access to it. Next is integrity, which keeps the data trustworthy by making sure it's not altered while stored or in transit. And lastly is non-repudiation, which provides proof of the origin or originator of the data. Now, we see cryptography in use almost everywhere today. Anytime a user visits a secure website that uses the HTTPS protocol, such as banking and shopping sites, all of the content transmitted between the user's computer and the server is in an encrypted state during transit, so eavesdroppers will not be able to see or access any of that sensitive information. We also see encryption in use in the wireless networks that have become so common in businesses and homes, which also safeguards the data that is in transit as it floats through the airwaves. But encryption can also be applied to files stored on any type of available medium today. Some high security organizations use a process known as encrypted at rest that keeps all the data on the hard drive in an encrypted state when the computer is turned off, and then it automatically decrypts that hard drive when the computer is turned on. And we also see encryption in use to protect movies from being copied off of disks, as well as many more mobile encryption capabilities that we will discuss in a later week of this course. Looking a little closer at protecting files on a disk, we can see in this graphic that Alice has one file which is stored in an encrypted state and a second file which is stored in clear text. The encrypted file will only be readable by Alice or by others who she provides with the decryption information. Anyone else accessing this computer will be able to read the second file, but the encrypted file will appear to them as a bunch of random characters and numbers, and they will not be able to read the true contents. Many of today's modern operating systems include the capability to encrypt individual files or folders to provide a greater degree of security without requiring as much overhead in the resources needed to encrypt the entire disk. Operating system files or applications can generally be replaced by reinstalling them, so encrypting this content is not as important as encrypting the actual sensitive data that is on the disk. Being able to encrypt those files individually, or encrypting one folder where all the sensitive files are stored, is a much more efficient method, assuming, of course, that the operating system's cryptographic functions are properly implemented. And there are still even more areas where cryptography comes into play. Cryptographic methods help to ensure the validity of digital signatures that can be used to electronically sign documents. Anonymous communication can be an important need if a user lives in a nation that frowns on dissension and tracks the communications of its citizens. Being able to anonymize your activity using encryption techniques could keep you safe from these type of oppressive regimes. And we also have digital currency, such as Bitcoin, that can allow money to be transferred to other people anywhere else in the world in a way that protects the identity of the sender. Of course, these capabilities can also be used by criminal enterprises who want to hide what they are doing, and this has been a topic of discussion in law enforcement circles as they look for ways to circumvent encryption to investigate criminal activity. I will discuss some of those concerns later in this course as well, but I'll state for now that just because something can be used for nefarious purposes shouldn't prohibit us from using it for positive purposes. And we also have the ability to protect and authenticate other types of user activity, such as using technology to cast votes in different elections. Imagine the problems we would have if millions of people voted electronically and the system was not secure, or non-repudiation could not be definitively assured. We would have millions of votes that would be tossed out. Fortunately, the same concepts that allow for securing emails, web traffic, and data at rest can be applied to electronic voting systems, and maybe one day we'll see this widespread use of electronic voting from our own homes without having to venture out to the polls or stand in long lines. When that day comes, cryptography will be the key to making it successful. Now, cryptography has a long history. We've seen great advances in this technology in the past few decades, but historical records show us that the idea of scrambling information so others would not be able to read it goes back thousands of years. The Greeks and the Romans had cryptographic capabilities, although rudimentary and easily breakable today, that protected messages being carried by couriers to different leaders. These messages couldn't be decrypted by the courier or by someone who intercepted them. So, cryptography may have even spared some couriers from torture since they didn't know how to decrypt the message they were carrying. But what we do know for sure is that someone developed some simple methods that, without the aid of a computer, would have been very difficult to break during that era. If we go back even further in time, we see some evidence of cryptography being used by the Egyptians around 1900 BCE and by others within the Middle Eastern region a few hundred years earlier. Suffice it to say, cryptography as a concept is not new, but technology has allowed us to greatly improve upon it. Now let's take a look at a few of the really old techniques. The Caesar cipher is named for Julius Caesar, who was known to use it in his private communications. It is a simple method that is widely known, but it is a great example of how encryption works for people new to the ideas of cryptography. This cipher is known as a substitution cipher because each letter of plain text is replaced by a different letter, effectively scrambling the message. The way this cipher works is that each letter in the message is replaced by another letter that is a fixed number of positions down the alphabet. For example, if we use the number 3 as that fixed number, then the letter A would be changed to D, B would become E, and so on for the entire message. Someone who had no knowledge of the idea of a substitution cipher, or who did not know the key to the substitution, would not be able to decrypt the message, and the contents would remain secure. Someone could try to decrypt the message by focusing on the first word and shifting in the opposite direction, starting with a fixed number of 1 and working their way up until the word became clear, and then apply that same fixed number to the rest of the message. But in the time of Julius Caesar, this method was pretty solid. The Veneer cipher has some similarities to the Caesar cipher in that it implements a similar concept, but it uses several Caesar ciphers in sequence, along with a table of alphabets that can be used as a key and a repeating keyword. The sender of a message will select a keyword and write it out under the message with the keyword repeating continuously until the end of the message is reached. The sender will then encrypt each letter individually by using the plain text and the keyword letters as X and Y coordinates of the alphabet chart. The recipient of the message will need to have a corresponding alphabet chart, and will need to know what keyword was used in order to decrypt the message. Now, this is a slightly more complicated version of the Caesar cipher because it includes several elements, but it also has the downside of the sender and receiver keeping the alphabet chart a secret from everyone else. These are just a few examples of some of the more widely known historical ciphers that have been used. If we fast forward to the time frame around World War II, we find that there were many modern advancements, some of which are still classified by the British and the United States. But we do know that mechanical and electromechanical rotor machines were used to protect information during the war. One famous machine you may have heard of was the Enigma machine used by the Germans, which was eventually cracked by mathematicians, and after the key tables and hardware were captured by Allied forces, the tide of the war shifted and allowed for the eventual victory. And if we move forward to 2001, we see the creation and adoption of the advanced encryption standard, which is still used throughout the world today and considered to be virtually unbreakable because the amount of energy consumption required to mathematically break the cipher is roughly equivalent to the annual electricity production of the entire United States, and the computing resources needed to perform such an action do not yet exist. And even if these levels could be maintained, it would still take a few years to break the code. So for the time being, AES will continue to be the standard we can all rely on to keep our data safe. Cryptography is a tremendous tool that can be used to secure information, and the technological advancements available today to us allow for an encryption standard that, unless the key is discovered, cannot feasibly be broken. This should give us some great assurances that our data is safe from competitors, foreign nations, criminals, and anyone else trying to eavesdrop on our communication.